Next, we have our panel, and just let me put on the screen so that you can see who else is with us. Sudhir from Lenskart and Abhinav from Cars24. And Dharmesh remains with us again from CanCertain, as you just saw and heard. So I have a bunch of questions to ask Sudhir and to ask Abhinav, especially because you guys have been here for a little while now, and you are expanding aggressively from what I can see, and what the market trends look like. It looks like that you've established a solid base in the region, especially in the UAE, and you're looking to expand further as well. So Sudhir, let's start with you. What advice do you think you would give to an early stage startup who's looking to expand into the Gulf? I mean, Lenskart and Cars24, they come already from a solid foundation back in India, where some of the teething troubles of early stage startups have been resolved. But if you had to give an advice to a founder with a new startup, what do you think would be some things to keep in mind for them? Sudhir.
Sure. Thanks, Roman. Pleasure to be here, and good to have Abhinav, and you've chosen the right people for the panel. So it's good to have the right people here.
Yep.
Great.
Pleasure is all ours.
I think that 3 points of feedback, right? Yep. One is the Middle East is not homogeneous as a market. I think that the expat population in each of these countries is extremely high. The ethnicities are varied. The pricing, the ability to pay for various products is also extremely high. In fact, we found that when we increase prices on certain products, that sales actually go up, right? And hence, really understanding the market and then understanding your product market fit is most important, right? And when I say product market fit is on the one side, what consumers want to buy at what price, for what, but also figuring out your costs, because depending on what your unit costs are, employee costs is one part, but your logistics or supply chain costs, as they may be, and Abhinav set up an entire plant, so he would know better, right? But that can also be quite complicated, right? So I think these are the two important points I would articulate. And then the third point is ensuring your legal structuring and your financing structuring is also on point, and spending enough time to ensure you have the right legal partners, because it's very easy to make some serious mistakes which can then bite you later.
Right. Abhinav, would you sort of agree with those? And then would you have anything else to add?
Hi, thank you for having me today. I completely actually agree with Sudhir's points. In fact, would also add that a couple of things we also realize with experience. One, Indian startups come into UAE and they think that there are so many Indians here. Right? Mm-hmm. But we have to understand that they are just Indian passport holders. They don't behave like Indians back in our country. So that's like a very, very important insight that we have to understand, that back in India, the behavior of Indians is not similar to Indian passport holders in this country, right? Mm-hmm. They want to behave the way people behave in Dubai, right? So that's I think one critical difference that we realize, and I think that also ties up to the level of customer experience that this country expects, right? So the same Indian passport holders expect a way higher level of customer experience that, say, people back in India do. I think that's another area where people will not agree to anything and everything that we give to them. People are demanding. People will expect a much better level of experience. To that point, I think this market has extremely high digital penetration, right? Pretty much 100%. Everyone is connected through a device. So word of mouth, typically. People don't refrain from writing on social media. People don't refrain from expressing their views here. The education levels of the people who we are targeting actually are fairly good. So this market can also be very non-forgiving for, say, poor experience or poor execution. So extremely important to be super well planned and take experience very seriously. I think that's one of the things that I would very strongly highlight. Completely agree with Sudhir on the legal bit. The structures here, of course, the ease of doing business is great in this country, but it's also equally important to have the right partners to understand, preempt, assess the gray areas well, and also sometimes even leverage what the government is offering. So legal bit is for sure extremely important. I think UAE, in my view, you will get an answer from this market pretty early. Right? So unlike other markets where you keep holding on and you keep hoping for an answer, I think you will get a proof of concept. You will get your answers from this market, whether it is working or not, at a very early stage. So that was, I think, it's another big positive that with the very early answers, you will know whether you will succeed in this market.
Right. There are some very interesting points that I would want to double click on from what you have said. So you mentioned behavior of Indians versus Indian passport holders. So in that context, do you think that the Middle East market is more diversified than, say, an Indian market? I'm bringing the Indian market up because, again, for a tech startup, the Indian population is, again, not very homogeneous, right? You have an India A, you have an India B, and then you have India C, right? India A is your urban, English educated who are very familiar with, your digital ecosystem, right? And then you have India B, which is slightly less familiar, maybe in tier 2 cities and forward. And then you have a very large population, which is India C, who are not in the digital ecosystem at all, right? So would you say that Indian startups can take that learning and sort of transfer that into their expansion, or when they're looking to expand into the UAE or the MENA region?
No, I think my only point was the India C that you're talking about. That's typically the blue collar workers here, right? Who are essentially more of the service providing economy,
right?
From the Indian startup ecosystem, they form more of an employee base than the customer base. Right? So I'm actually not counting the India C at all.
Right.
I'm not talking about the blue collar workers here. But I think typically India A and India B are the real target markets, mostly for startups. I think another zone that we also just adding another point here. It's also important to present a very global view of the company, right?
Yep.
Companies coming from India are typically associated with not so great experience or not so great product quality. It is typically, associated with, say, a no frills attached service in most cases. So it's also extremely important that we present ourselves as a more global brand name, a global company, and less of an Indian company coming abroad, because I think that has had a very big impact on what I see in terms of customer attraction.
Right. Understood. Perfect. The second point that I wanted to double click on is what both Abhinav, you and Sudhir mentioned, is the importance of getting your legal stuff in order, right? I mean, this is again, so we work with a lot of early stage startups who want to enter this region, and we stress, we emphasize the importance of getting in front of the regulators, in front of the lawmakers, and ensuring that they are on board with what you're doing, because we have seen in the past about with companies who wanted to come and sort of fly under the radar in terms of legal issues or regulatory issues, and that has never really worked out well. So both of you mentioned how important legal is. So would you say that to all early stage startups that if you want to come here, you need to invest a certain amount of time and money into ensuring that your regulatory work is in order, your legal work is in order?
I've built a business also in Indonesia.
Yeah,
and it's required everywhere, actually, every international market, right? It's important, and it's not less or more in any market. And in fact, in Indonesia, it's even worse.
Okay.
Right. And I think that the challenge in the Middle East market is that is that there are laws, and then there are laws that have launched, and then there are laws that are going to be launched.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And you find that the laws that have launched are also not implemented.
Right.
And then you find that the laws that are going to be launched, if you know what laws are going to be launched, then you can actually take better decisions. Right. And for instance, we actually started off being a 51-49, and then we turned around and we came back to being 100% zero. We lost a few months, but it actually is the right decision. Right. And I think that hence having the right, because it's almost 60-70% lobbying and 20-30% legal advice. Right.
That sounds about right.
With a lot of interpretations and so on, and in fact, in a market like Saudi, it's even worse.
I completely agree with that. Okay, to move on a bit, Abhinav, you mentioned that there are the digital penetration in this region is really high, right? And more than word of mouth, it is the digital. You have to put yourself out there digitally to get in front of people's eyes. So as part of that, there are a lot of flashy websites and services out there who say that, hey, come to UAE, we'll help you set up your company in 2 days or money back, that kind of a service, and they make it look really straightforward. So in your experience, what are some of the challenges that you faced when you were entering the GCC, or when you're trying to scale out from UAE? Some of the key issues that you think early stage startups should have in mind before they go for 5 days or money back, if your company is not started kind of service.
I think typically, a couple of opinions that I've developed over the last few months, right, while we've been operating. So one, I think most of these startups or companies that are coming from India are disrupting some of the other space. So not necessary that rules are in place to support companies that are trying to disrupt, but and which is why it becomes even more important to revisit, to understand what is the law of the land. I think one very, very good thing here in UAE, which even Sudhir mentioned, is the government here is pretty open to modifying and to fixing laws. Right? We can call it lobbying, we can call it their open-mindedness. But you can go speak to the lawmakers, you can make them understand if you're trying to
absolutely
change, disrupt, and improve the environment. So I think that's a great thing about this country. Of course, ultimately, it is a painful process to ultimately catch hold of lawmakers, make a route there and figure out your answers. But at least I feel that this is one of the most fantastic things about this country, that it is open-minded. They understand that technology is the future of any of the countries, and they are ready to make amendments, give you a chance, hear you out, and at least at least take a fair call. So I think those are some of the areas which also again make it important that first we understand what is the current law. We catch hold of the right people who can, because typically again startups will be disrupting, so there are it's hard that they would be riding on existing laws, right? So most likely they would need, say, capable companies, people, teams, contacts to get to the right lawmakers and essentially at least take exceptional approvals in their favor. So that's something that I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. Sudhir, you were in agreement with what Abhinav was saying.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that the extent to which the business constituents are listened to while framing frameworks and also changing them is really impressive, right? And also, if you just look at the UAE and the number of new laws and visas and things that have been rolled out in the last 1 year, it's at the speed of light. It's really, really fast, right? And I think the country has ambitious plans of moving from increasing their population significantly, and Dubai moving from 3.5 million people to 6.5 million people. And I think a lot of decisions and a lot of legal changes and framework changes are being made, and a lot of steps in the right direction.
Right. I mean, I'm in complete agreement with both of you, because it has been our experience as well. I mean, we are in the business of helping, tech companies connect with regulators, and we have always seen that the government here and the lawmakers and the regulators are super open to be approached. If you have a fantastic product that they believe that the country can take advantage of, they are more than happy to have a sit down with you and see what they can do to make sure the environment is conducive to that business, right? That sort of flows into the next question that I had was, what are some of the positive experiences that may have surprised you when you decided to enter the UAE or any other, or when you're trying to scale into the GCC? Is there anything that you faced and you were like, wow, that's cool?
I think if I may answer, I think UAE, just the speed with which you can get things done initially is impressive, and I think depends on the sector you're in. You get certain grants and certain benefits and ESOPs. But I think what really blew my mind was Saudi, and Saudi. Both Abhinav and me were at a conference, and the government has been so forthcoming, and they're the extent of funding, also having various programs where they fund up to 50% of the salaries of when you hire locals, right? So just the drive and energy in Saudi is overwhelming, and how that country wants to grow, and how they're thinking in a very forward way. And everybody is in on it, right? And my days in Saudi are ending at 12:01 a.m. and the locals have so much passion and energy. It's amazing to see.
Right? Abhinav?
I think I completely agree. Also, I think a couple of things that surprised us. One, the typical tech adoption, the early adopters, I would say, in UAE are massive. Right? So it just gives you a great head start with your product. Right? People want to try. People have that appetite to try out new technology products, and I think that gives you a fair chance at an early stage. And that's why I was saying that you will get your answers pretty early, if your product market fit is there or not. So it's not a very long waiting game. That is, I think, number one, which interests me. Second, I think from a distance, we tend to club Middle East together. There are very low synergies according to me, right? UAE and Saudi are completely different markets. Customer behavior is different. Governments behave in a different way. They're at a different maturity curve, right? The smaller GCC countries are, in a very different zone. So clubbing the Middle East, clubbing the GCC together and thinking that, hey, if I have been successful in UAE, I will crack Saudi as well. I don't think that's the right strategy.
Right. Absolutely.
Completely different markets. It's literally sitting in Delhi and saying, oh, hey, everything in South India is the same. But that's not how it is, right? Every market is completely different. So Middle East is 100% a completely different geography. Each country behaves in a very, very different manner. There are some synergies that different governments are trying to do, but not enough for you to have a blueprint in one country and implement it in the other. I think they behave very differently.
Right. Understood. Yes, I agree. Because the countries themselves are so different in terms of size and population. I mean, what you can do in the UAE, you cannot do in Egypt, right? Because again, it's large country. I mean, the UAE is 10-12 million people versus Egypt, which is 100 million plus. They have their own economic challenges, their political challenges, and their policy challenges as well, right? Dharmesh, you would agree with the point as well, right? That the early adoption of technology in the UAE especially really gives a head start to tech companies in the region.
From our experience, we found that the region is hungry for tech. UAE does not want to be seen as a holiday destination anymore. They want to be seen as the hub in the Middle East. They don't want to be writing checks to companies in the UK or USA or India and financing tech startups over there. They want those startups to come to the UAE. And as I think Abhinav said, they are funding the programs to fund this expansion into the UAE, and especially the UAE themselves. A lot of that is Abu Dhabi driven, and I think one of the key things to understand is the difference between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And where there's also, I would say, in my experience, a behavioral difference between the people in the two places, maybe. But Abu Dhabi, I think, wants some serious investment and some serious moves of companies into there.
Right.
Obviously, there's competition between the two Emirates, So
Yeah,
that's
you're
one
right.
of the things that you can leverage and play on, to be perfectly
You're
honest.
right. Dubai, I think it is today that the government of Dubai has launched $100 million VC fund for tech startups, and the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Qatar a couple of weeks ago announced that they're moving away from large industrial or real estate assets investment, and they're going to move to tech investments. So there is a lot of movement happening in this region to make this a more tech-friendly or a more knowledge-based economy environment, which is great for tech companies who are trying to enter this region. So my next question is, I mean, you must all be aware that the India and UAE, they signed a very broad trade agreement known as the CEPA fairly recently. And in light of those, we know that the government of India has a lot of priorities in terms of trade with the Middle East. But what do you think is some of the things that could be improved, which would help, Indian startups, or typically smaller Indian startups, to sort of leverage, this connection with UAE? The UAE and India, they signed a really large trade agreement, right, where they want to increase the trade to $100 billion in the next 5 years. But that is, again, very focused on trade, on stuff like gold and other commodities, etc. Do you think that there could be more impetus from the Indian government to sort of bridge, the two tech ecosystems a bit better? Because we're seeing a lot of diversions in some certain tech sectors, for example, crypto, right? So India is completely shutting it down, while Dubai last month they launched the virtual asset regulatory authority. So Indian crypto.
So I definitely think so. Yeah. I actually think that if you look at Southeast Asia, India, and the Middle East, right? I think India is potentially 4 or 5 years ahead of the Middle East in some level, and and maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of Southeast Asia also, right? Across in evolution and innovation and generally expansion of the space and business models, everything, right? And I think the Middle East and India can really work together in terms of Indian entrepreneurs and Indian companies coming here to guide more Middle East entrepreneurs, to guide the government on building the ecosystem, right? Rather than the UAE government doing it themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Or even Saudi. And I think Saudi is trying to do that, but perhaps not enough. And I think we should stop looking at these governments should stop looking at the US for inspiration, because the markets are so different that they're irrelevant, and not look at China for reasons I think they know best, right? And I think that I think it's high time that we realize that the real heroes and market swayers are actually the Indian market.
Yeah, right? I mean, there is
I
no doubt.
I don't see enough of that, and that could be for a variety of reasons, both reasons from India and reasons from the Middle East. On your other points on decisions around business models in crypto, and those are very government decisions, which I don't think the startup ecosystem can get involved in, because those could be for a variety of reasons, right?
Yeah. I mean, I use crypto just as an example because there's such a large diversion.
Yeah, but in India, the view on crypto seems to change every 2-3 weeks anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. I would actually add to this, right? So, India has this advantage of scale, right? The market is massive. So a lot of development in India gets justified for the scale it is addressing, right? And a lot of lack of development on the technology side in UAE is because there's a low scale. So, I think one classic example is banking. They still don't have an instant transfer. There is no instant interbank transfer. There are still wallets missing here. There's still UPI sort of technologies that are missing here. So I think those are, very, very critical areas that can really benefit UAE specifically and the small GCC countries. I would still keep Saudi ahead of, say, UAE in the financial technology evolution. But I think those are some very, very critical areas where UAE can take a lot of inspiration, support, technology transfers, and actually get a lot of development underway. We can move several years ahead in literally a matter of months. So a lot of technology infrastructure and areas that require scale for development are present in India and absent in UAE. So I think that is one specific area that I would very strongly urge both governments to look at, and I think they can both benefit from each other. So UAE has low scale but high convenience premium. India has high scale but low convenience premium. I think a handshake of both could bring in a great answer.
But from my experience, and I can compare the experience of our Indian operation with the UK, and in terms of expansion into the Middle East, what I've seen from the Indian government, which is going back to your question about signing trade deals. Signing trade deals is great, but I think the government in India need to do far more to facilitate and then facilitate and promote these trade deals, especially to startups to export that technology and that knowledge. That's a big difference I've seen between the UK government and the Indian government. Whereas from CanCertain, the support we've had from the UK government has been fantastic. They've given grants, they've invited us to diplomatic receptions, etc. Made introductions, but when we've asked the same from the Indian government, there's not been that support. The second part I would say is I think India still need to, as big a country it is and as developed as it may seem to other countries, they need to develop that business infrastructure still to facilitate international trade. For example, one of our issues is the time it's taken to get samples out of India is taking 4 days just to leave the country. And there doesn't seem to be that emphasis on this is international trade. This is, I think there's some mentality within the government, and please forgive me if I'm upsetting anybody, it's not my intention, but I think there needs to be more emphasis on expansion and promoting the fantastic companies in India, outside India, and doing everything that they can do. Because signing a trade deal is great, it's a photo opportunity, but it's what happens after that you do to encourage everything.
Right, which is why we find the trade deal, the CEPA signed with the UAE so interesting, is because yes, there is a lot of focus on trade, your usual goods and commodities trade, but they are trying. Yesterday or day before, they launched an online hub for Indian companies to explore opportunities in the UAE, and last week the UAE launched a similar online hub as well. So there have been some attempts by them. I don't think that the government is not aware of this problem, but as you know, in India, it just takes some time to get it running. And I think with CEPA, they are trying to sort of address some of these issues, but let's wait and see. When we sort of asked this question to ourselves as to why don't more Indian startups come to the UAE, we started to look for data. And we found, some 40 or 50 odd Indian startups which have entered the Middle East over the last few years. And most of them have expanded into the UAE and some into Saudi Arabia as well, and very occasionally into other countries in the region. The only startup from India which I know in Egypt is Zoomcar. So in your view, Abhinav, Sudhir and Dharmesh, why don't more Indian startups look at the MENA region? Beyond just the fact that the scale is not there. From our conversations with certain unicorns in India, they said that, hey, why don't I just expand into a Visakhapatnam, and that would cover the size of Bahrain or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. I think when you're looking at market sizing, you need to look at the P's and the Q's, right? So it's both price and quantity. I think people did a few things wrong, right? One is that the price here, ASPs here is maybe 4x of India in most cases, right? And most people don't realize that unless they come to this market. Number one. Number two, people get put off by the size of the UAE population, but UAE is really a gateway market. Right? The rest of the markets are much
100%.
bigger.
100%.
And if you look at the MENA region, it's 450 million people, right? And if 450 million people, and if it's 4x in terms of price, then it's bigger than the Indian market, right? But you need to do it right, and you need to be willing to set up and commit for the long term. You can't just you can't look at the Middle East as though you're looking at Asia and just set up in Singapore. right? But most people want to do that. It's sort of Dubai is Middle East for beginners, right? But the Middle East is much bigger than that.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. Dharmesh, you were also in agreement with what Sudhir just said.
Oh, completely. Our approach was always UAE first, because it's the gateway. As he said, it's where for our particular service, it is a health tourism, sort of spot for people from Saudi, from the other MENA countries to come to. But it's part of your learning curve. And if you're a company from India wanting to expand globally, I think it's a great way to learn. It's a great place to take your first international step, because from then you can then learn and adapt and move into Europe or the USA or wherever, or even Africa.
Absolutely. I mean, we see that the next 1 billion people coming online and using the internet are going to come from, the Middle East and Africa. So that is, a similar market size, or maybe even slightly bigger than the India Sea that I was speaking about earlier. So to take advantage of that, I mean, I agree that, the UAE has to be the first home base for Indian startups to expand into the region and use it as a launch pad, which is what we sort of, emphasize again to the startups that we support, that the UAE is a great launch pad for Indian startups to access the rest of the region. Because again, you have, large expat populations from all over the region as well. So that can help you connect, that can help you spot the correct people and help connect to those markets as well. Support that Indian startups would need, when smaller scale startups that would need when they come to the region. I mean, large startups who are already successful in India don't need that kind of handholding when they expand into markets outside of the country. But for smaller scale startups or earlier stage startups, what do you think is some things that they would like to get help on, which they would not ideally be able to do themselves?
I suppose we're a small Indian, startup coming into Middle East. One of the things you would probably need help on is the market research and understanding the market, and the support in that. That I think that's vital. Knowing the market before you make your first entry into that, and being able to gather that data. Can your product or your service or whatever it is be supported? Can it work over there? What's the reception? What's the regulatory side of things? These all, these are all a multinational has people in departments covering all of this off. For a small startup, you need somebody to help support in these activities, but it's got to be at at an affordable price.
I agree, and that sort of goes back to the point that Abhinav mentioned earlier about stuff like customer experience expectations, right? Which are very high compared to other markets like India.
Completely.
And that's the same what again what Sudhir mentioned, the P's and Q's, about the pricing, etc. And you mentioned legal as well, Dharmesh, the regulatory side of things. Very, very, very true. To agree. Anything else that you guys might want to add to that?
No, I think it's a great market, and I think just to touch upon what else, I think as this market evolves, there will be consultants who will help with business development, who will help with introductions, who will help with introductions to governments, introductions to large corporates, because I mean a large part of this economy is managed by 6-7 companies, right? So I think, and as this evolves further, then that will happen. It will happen on its own. And I think it's only positive. If you look at the Middle East versus Southeast Asia versus say the US, I would think that actually even with what's happened with COVID, I would think the Middle East is probably the hottest place to be in right now.
Yeah, I would not disagree with that.
Africa after that. I don't know enough about Africa, but definitely Middle East is super hot because of all these points we've raised, and with Saudi also really growing now, and so much capital also coming into this market.
Yeah, I mean, we believe that the pandemic really accelerated the thinking in governments in the region that, we need to really push to diversify away from just being a hydrocarbon economy, and really invest in the knowledge economy as well, because that's how you sort of retain talent and build, a core, economic structure away from just hydrocarbons. Right.
I'll just add there, Romit. I think we've seen a lot of Indian startups come set shortly.
Yeah.
Some of them have succeeded, some of them have not. I think my view is less on the support required. I think there is adequate support available. There are enough things that are already available in this market to help you set up a business here. There are enough companies like yours who are happy to handhold in the initial days, right?
Yep.
I think, of course, like discovery is one journey, right? Where you get to the right company and figure it out. But I think it is more driven on focus, right? A lot of Indian startups want to just go put their flag and sort of, assume the TAM of that economy.
Yep.
Whereas the real focus still is not there, right? So the question to most founders is, how much time are they really spending in setting up a country like UAE or Saudi, right? Versus, we are an Indian company, we have the money, let's just go put our flag there, and hey, we are also there.
Yeah.
Which I think that's the mindset and thought process that I feel is like a massive disconnect. Right?
Okay.
I don't attribute the failure of Indian startups in the country to support or hand-holding. I think it is already enough, right? There are even like basic effort in such a low friction economy should be able to get you to a great answer. I think it is more of the focus from the founders on the seriousness on this market, and I think decentralization, removing that mask of let us do it our way, the way we do it in India, versus actually localizing, customizing, and giving the decentralized thought process to the team there. I think that I think is primarily my view on that.